Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride. And this evening we have an interview I recorded a little earlier today with Pete Wishart MP to discuss strategies towards an referendum. But first, we have a quick rundown of today's top headlines. And we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,164,199 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,071,044 were confirmed negative, 93,155 were positive. There were 969 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, there were 37 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone will show symptoms, and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. As always, we urge you, if you're showing symptoms of a fever, a new dry persistent cough, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 1,099 people in hospital last night, 80 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 3,676. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 57,551 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 521 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. SNP MP Drew Hendry has said that the threat to the Scottish Parliament has been made crystal clear, with the UK government now openly stating its intention to undo devolution. The leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, tweeted that constitutional reforms brought in by the Blair government after 1997 must be undone. Later in Parliament, he described such reforms as blunders and said Boris Johnson's government must restore our constitution to its proper form. Commenting, Drew Hendry said, "No one in Scotland should be in any doubt. The Tories never wanted devolution and they are now doing whatever they can to undermine and now undo it. It seems the Internal Market Bill, which fundamentally undermines the Scottish Parliament, is just the start of the Tory plan to dismantle devolution." Commenting on the Public Accounts Committee report that reveals it will take another 120 years and £132 billion to decommission UK civil nuclear sites, the SNP's energy spokesperson Alan Brown MP said, "This is yet more evidence that the UK government should cease its obsession with nuclear power and commit to scrapping any new nuclear power projects, including those announced last week, which could cost another £50 billion. This is money that could be spent on sustainable, renewable energy projects." It also shines a light on the Tories' incompetence that these costs had not been considered when they were falling over their feet to jump on the nuclear bandwagon. The SNP has said that the only way to protect Scotland's place in Europe is to become an independent country, as a new poll reveals the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland think the UK government is not being honest about the impact Brexit will have on the economy. The YouGov poll, conducted yesterday, reveals that more than 3/4 of people in Scotland think the UK government isn't being clear about the impact Brexit is going to have on the UK economy, compared to just 15% who think it is. Across the UK, more than 2/3 think this government isn't being clear, compared to just 23% who think it is. It follows Scottish Government modelling of a low-deal Brexit, which estimates that Scottish GDP would be 6.1% lower by 2030 compared with continued EU membership, costing around £1,600 per person in Scotland. The SNP has warned that households across the UK face a double hit to their incomes and livelihoods as the Tory government imposes an extreme Brexit just a matter of weeks on top of the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Following the Chancellor's spending review, analysis from the Resolution Foundation found that average pay packets could be cut by £1,200 a year by 2025. Oh, excuse me. found that average pay packets could be cut by £1,200 a year by 2025, and that weaker pay growth and higher unemployment will serve to prolong Britain's living standards squeeze. Its chief executive added that the pandemic is just the latest of 3 once-in-a-lifetime economic shocks the UK experienced in a little over a decade, following the financial crisis and Brexit. The result is an unprecedented 15-year-long living standards squeeze. The SNP has urged the UK government to bring forward the delayed Online Harms Bill to make the internet safer for all and prevent consumers from online scams. The consultation on the Online Harms White Paper closed in February, but the UK government has failed to bring draft legislation before Parliament, and there are fears that MPs may not see the details of a bill until the end of 2021. The SNP's Consumer Affairs spokesperson has said that the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport must get the ball rolling on the bill as we head into the festive period, when millions of people will be shopping online due to limited retail hours and closures due to the pandemic. The SNP has said that the bill must not allow tech giants to shirk their responsibilities when it comes to the prevention of scam content proliferating on their sites. The fact the SNP are allowing Heathrow Airport to influence policy undermines the party's credibility on climate, according to the Scottish Greens. Heathrow, a long-standing sponsor of the SNP's annual conference, is running a fringe event this weekend on sustainable travel. The Scottish Government signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Heathrow in 2016, backing a third runway and remain committed to expanding air travel, a move that would increase flight numbers and emissions in Scotland. Responding, Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvey said, "Once again we see the SNP looking to the industries that caused the most damage for answers. Pinning our hopes on hydrogen and electric passenger planes, technology that isn't even developed yet, is pure fantasy when we have less than a decade to rapidly decarbonise our economy." New advice from the SQA that pupils preparing for music exams who are unable to be taught properly should try learning a different instrument is ridiculous and insulting, Scottish Greens education spokesperson Ross Greer has said. The exams body has issued guidance on how COVID is impacting exams, which include the line, "Brass, woodwind and voice candidates who are unable to be supported by face-to-face learning and teaching leading up to their assessment might wish to consider the option of learning a different instrument." A survey of parents has revealed that only a quarter believe the Highers and Advanced Highers should go ahead as normal next year. The National Parent Forum of Scotland's survey of parents and carers reveals deep concerns about how learning has already been disrupted this year for pupils in the senior phase. 3/4 believe a decision on the Higher and Advanced Higher exams must be made now or before Christmas. The Scottish Greens have consistently led calls for all 2021 exams to be cancelled and replaced with a robust system of continuous assessment, which can take into account how much learning a young person has missed due to COVID disruption. Education Secretary John Swinney confirmed earlier this month that he would make a decision by mid-February. An Iranian scientist, long suspected of masterminding a secret nuclear bomb program, was killed in an ambush near Tehran today, potentially provoking confrontation between Iran and its enemies in the last weeks of Donald Trump's presidency. The military advisor to Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei blamed Israel for the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, and vowed to retaliate for his killing. Fakhrizadeh died of injuries in hospital after armed assassins fired on his car, Iranian state media reported. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, along with the White House and the US Defense and State Departments, declined to comment on the killing. Some of the world's poorest children, whose lives have been further affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, are to benefit from £2 million in funding from the Scottish Government's International Development Fund. Working with the humanitarian aid organisation UNICEF, the funds will also be used to help prepare the health systems in Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda for the distribution of the COVID vaccine. More than 53,000 health and social care staff have received psychological support from the National Wellbeing Hub since it was launched in May. Established during the first phase of the coronavirus pandemic, the hub supports all health and social care workers, including unpaid carers, who need help due to COVID-19, alongside a new 24/7 national wellbeing helpline. Key sectors where employment has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic will receive support through the £25 million National Transition Training Fund. The fund will support retraining projects for careers in areas particularly hit, including aviation, construction, and tourism. It will also help with career transition into areas of the Scottish economy with most potential for future growth, such as digital and green technologies. And finally, Scottish consumers are being encouraged to go local as part of a new initiative that will transform local convenience stores into marketplaces selling more local produce. The initial phase of the initiative will see £100,000 invested in 10 local shops to increase the space given to Scottish products, broaden the range of Scottish products offered, and enhance consumer engagement with Scottish products. So that is all the headlines for today. And now we go, as I said earlier, to an interview I recorded with Pete Wishart earlier today. And I should just point out that the news about what Jacob Rees-Mogg had said about dismantling devolution came in after we recorded the interview. So unfortunately, we couldn't get Pete's comments on that. I'm sure if you keep an eye on his Twitter feed, you'll see plenty of him talking about it, though. But we do go to that interview now. So I'm joined now by Pete Wishart, MP for Perth and North Perthshire, and the SNP's Shadow Cabinet Office spokesperson. So Pete, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. I'm actually really pleased. We had two superb by-election results in Perth. A 13% swing in one of the seats, and the other seat, which is a curious three-way marginal, where we secured the most first preference votes, we actually lost to the Liberals. And I know you don't hear that said very often in Scotland, losing to the Liberals. And I think the Tories were as shocked as we were to find that that was the result of that by-election.
So you up celebrating last night?
Well, this was just a couple of hours ago. I'm almost just come straight from the count, actually, in the Dewar Centre in Perth. And, we're pretty used to celebrating in Perthshire. We've had a good run of results recently, and we're looking forward to both the contests and the Perthshire South and the Perthshire North Scottish parliamentary constituencies in May.
So, Pete, the last time you and I spoke was at the SNP conference in October of last year. Obviously, an awful lot has happened since then. But during that conversation, you mentioned the possibility of legal action to establish whether the Scottish Parliament did have the power to legislate for a referendum without a Section 30 order being agreed. And there is, of course, now a legal action going through the courts, courtesy of Martin Keatings. I wonder, what do you make of that legal process that's happening now?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's particularly helpful just now. I mean, I believe that there is a case to be made that the Scottish Parliament, within the remit and range of its devolved powers, may have the possibility of successfully and legally legislating for an independence referendum. But that's going to be a part of a process that we have to sort of work out in terms of how we move towards independence just now. The fears I've got with the court action that's getting taken by Martin Keatings is that it could leave us in a very invidious situation where, if he's not successful, we'll have created a legal cage for an independence referendum that we might subsequently need as part of our ongoing campaign to ensure we get there and get to a situation where we do win our independence. And I feel going for this just now, with the risk of losing that and entrapping us in this cage, might just throw a number of spanners into a number of works which I find is unsuitable. And there's a couple of other things that go along with this just now too. I mean, if it's successful, great, and I think everybody would cheer on him, and we'll all say that that was a fantastic initiative and campaign. But the other risk that we've got, we saw this in a couple of pieces of other legislation being walked through the Scottish Parliament, is that the Westminster government will just legislate to make it within their remit of powers and strike it down. So I'm not entirely sure how much further this takes us forward. I'm not personally opposed to the idea that this will have to be challenged in the courts at some time. I just don't think it's particularly helpful or useful to be doing that just now, particularly when we've got an election coming up in May where, a lot of the effort focus is going to be on this. And if we lose that, it could be really, really bad.
But wouldn't the same arguments apply if the UK government, for example, were to challenge a referendum bill that was passed by the Scottish government? Wouldn't that ultimately have the same effect, win or lose. It would just be establishing what the law had always been, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfectly good point, and I think at some point the legal determination of whether the Scottish Parliament could do this or not will have to be tested, and there's various legal opinions about that, and you've probably seen them as well as I have, Kenny. There's a number of our legal authorities who are friends of the party, Elaine McCargan, Andrew Tickell, who looked very closely at this, and like the assumptions that they make just now about whether a case would be successful or not is roughly in the terms and the realms of unsubstantiated and inconclusive. And I think that was the outcome that most people would sort of anticipate just now. But I mean, nobody's asked this question because it's not suited anybody's interests at this stage for it to be conclusively and definitively proven. And it'll come a point, and it might not be too far away from now, where we will need to establish this. And if it comes on the back of a referendum bill or a referendum act in the Scottish Parliament, then it's probable, if not almost certain, that the UK government will challenge that. And that might be a good point for this to be pursued and looked at, and to ensure that we are in a sort of situation where we do know exactly what's happening. But what's happening just now with the Keating's case isn't that part of where we need to be just now, and it isn't helpful about the different stages that we need to be in terms of progressing towards winning this independence referendum and securing their independence as a nation.
Now, there is also a wee question about semantics. There have been a number of people, even some people quite senior in the SNP, that have used the words legal and illegal referendums. And I just wonder, doesn't that kind of undermine the argument for Scottish sovereignty, that whether it's strictly speaking legal or not under UK law is almost irrelevant because the Scottish people are sovereign? And don't you think that kind of playing into unionist tropes with talk of illegal referendums is kind of risky?
Well, at the same time, we've got to deal with the hard realities of what the actual law is. I mean, and this is why, I mean, the Keating's case is getting taken forward, and why at some point this will have to be substantiated and tested, is that we are within a legal framework which the UK government, of course, adjudicates, settles, and defines. We are a sovereign people. Everybody knows that. We are sovereign. We even had the debate in Westminster where that was acknowledged by the Westminster Parliament. But sovereignty of the people, when it comes to where we are just now, is a political and legalistic concept. It doesn't define the actual laws of this country. And I think sometimes that what we've got to say, and sometimes it's a hard message for a lot of people who are out there who just assert that there's a sovereignty of the people, and that trumps everything to do with UK law. It doesn't. We are bound by UK law as being a part of the United Kingdom, and there's no getting around that fact. Now, there may be a case where we can have a legal referendum, but that will have to be proven within UK law. We can't just decide because we're a sovereign people that this is going to happen and ignore UK law. And that's the difficulty that we're in just now. And this is why we want to be independent, so we're not subject to UK laws and arbitrary decisions about our powers of our parliament, that we're in charge of this. But to try and wish away certain things, I'm not entirely sure that's a helpful way to proceed. And I think when we're starting to look at these things, we've got to accept that there are conditions that we're placed in, and that's why we want to be independent. So we dispense with them and get on with governing ourselves.
Now, one of the main reasons we wanted to have you on the show this week was because this week you published a blog everybody's been talking about. And you said in that you were setting out a potential kind of way to deal with Boris Johnson if he remains intransigent on a Section 30. But you've said a number of times that you're absolutely convinced that the Westminster government will agree to a referendum if the SNP does sufficiently well in the May elections. I wonder, what is it that's causing you to have such confidence in that?
Because I'm observing what the Conservatives are doing, and I've never seen them put together such a significant resource in order to prepare for the next referendum. I mean, as you know, I've said, and you said, I shadow the Cabinet Office, and I've seen some of the things they've done. They've got constitution units that have been set up at Number 10. They've got a massive resource being set up at the Cabinet Office, and they're assembling this to fight the next independence referendum. And if you look to what some of the more thoughtful Conservative spokespersons saying, and I'll even include people like John Major with his daft two-question referendum, a lot of them are now starting to concede and accept the fact that there will be another independence referendum. And there is a huge tension going on in the Conservative Party just now about how they deal with this. I'm not entirely sure which way it'll go. My strong belief and view is that the pragmatists will prevail, and they'll prevail for a number of reasons, and I'll mention two of them. If we walk away with next election with a majority for the Scottish National Party based on a majority of the people of Scotland supporting independence, that places the Conservative government in a really difficult and invidious situation and position, because the battle doesn't become a battle with the Scottish National Party in the case of stopping a referendum. It becomes a battle with democracy itself. And believe me, that is an uncomfortable place for any government to be. And the second point is that it's in their interest to go early, because if they're left in a position where they're saying, no, after us securing a majority and on the back of a majority of people of Scotland saying that they want to be an independent nation, they're only going to drive support for independence. So it's going to get higher and higher and higher. And all of a sudden, they'll be totally consumed and overwhelmed by this. So as well as accruing that resource, because the Conservatives probably looked at this and thought, like, it's going to be unsustainable for us to continue to say no. And that is where the difficulties start to lie. They're going to have to go early if they're going to have any chance of winning this. But I think you're referring to my blog, and if they do say no, which I don't think they will because of those reasons, there will be a number of things that we'll have to do in order to try and ensure that they do come in line and accept the fact of their democratic obligations to the people of Scotland.
Now, for anybody who hasn't already read your blog, could you just take us through some of the ideas that you think could apply pressure and how you think that might work?
Well, there's lots and lots of things, and I don't think you want to give away your total game plan, but there's a few things that I mentioned in my blog. One would be we start to withdraw from the institutions of the UK state, and the examples that I gave would be the infrastructure, the mechanism that govern the relationships amongst the UK nations. And we start to come out of that, the Joint Ministerial Councils and all the other things where workings come together, and they meet regularly, usually in Westminster. We start to look at the role of the Westminster members of Parliament. I talked about us convening as a Scottish Grand Committee, which we would operate and consider the reserved issues and points. We wouldn't serve on UK legislation when it came to Westminster. In the Scottish Parliament, I mentioned a couple of things that we could start to do. One would be like increasingly withdrawing our legislative consent on a number of pieces of legislation that's required in order for Scottish Government to grant the UK Parliament to move forward, things like the Internal Market Bill and other things that we've seen. And the other one was to build international capacity, because if we're going to get independence or not, it's going to be dependent upon the international community accepting this. They're going to have to say whether we get into that club, and particularly when it comes to the EU, who have taken a particularly strong line that anything has to be constitutional and legal for us to join the EU. So we start to build that international capacity, thinking about international missions, engaging properly. Because if we get to the position where the UK is continuing to say that we're going to have to rely on them to sanction this, to ensure that we get their support to do this. Because at the end of the day, the UK government might not just be saying no to democracy, denying democracy. They may be totally ignoring it. And that is a point where the international community would have to be very much engaged in this, because they couldn't allow it to stand, because it would be intolerable for that situation to continue in a world where we're governed by international institutions and the rule of law.
Now, we've heard from people like Mike Russell and his counterparts in the Welsh and Northern Irish governments that the Joint Ministerial Council and those kind of intergovernmental bodies just aren't really working very well just now. And on the subject of legislative consent, the Scottish Parliament has already rejected legislative consent for various bits of Brexit legislation, including, as you said, the Internal Market Bill. So why is that not having impact now?
Well, it is to a degree. I mean, I chair the Scottish Affairs Committee. I think you know that. We've looked very carefully at the intergovernmental relationships and machinery. And you're right to characterise it as something that's barely working and is hardly supported from any of the devolved administrations across the United Kingdom. And you're right again to say that When it comes to Brexit legislation, things like the internal market, we've already withdrawn our legislative consent. But there's other things beyond that, and which require legislative consent. There's motions go down all the time which require the Scottish Parliament to back in this, and it's usually just more routine type stuff. But if we were to say increasingly that we're not even prepared to look at that and accept that, then that creates all sorts of logjams and problems and difficulties for the UK government. And then you get into things like constitutional disputes about the Scottish Parliament starting to legislate at the very edges of their powers. And I'll give you one example, which I think we should be looking at very carefully and closely if we do go forward in this situation next year. And that's the issue of drug consumption rooms, which has got overwhelming support by the Scottish people, which I believe our Parliament supports, but is UK law, but there is still enough of a grey area when it comes to policing arrangements. That's something that we can look at and test constitutionally with the United Kingdom, and we get stuck in all these constitutional disputes about us legislating at the edges of the power, and maybe beyond at some point. So these are all the things that are open to us, and these are the things that I think that starts to maximise the pressure within the United Kingdom. And it's not us sitting back and just allowing this to happen. And I think the UK government have probably looked at the prospect of all this coming down the line, and it's another reason why I think that they will go very early for a referendum. And I don't think nobody wants this. I mean, but it's entirely up to the UK government. I mean, they could decide for the working partnership to satisfy the democratic desires and demands of the Scottish people, and we could do this constructively in partnership, and we allow the Scottish people a clear choice, or we do it the hard way. We do it through a drawn-out process where we are possibly even maybe souring future relationships with the rest of the United Kingdom. But the choice is the UK's. And whatever they choose, we will win because we must.
Now, I mean, even if this strategy works, let's assume it would, people will ask, the 2017 manifesto said this would be a triple lock mandate for another referendum, and that it would be democratically unsustainable for the Tories to keep saying no. So the question arises, why hasn't the SNP been pursuing this strategy already?
Well, I think you'd have to ask somebody more senior in the SNP than myself, but they're entirely right not to do this. The thing that's changed everything about all the people that refer to all the different mandates that we've had, and maybe we should have used them, and maybe we shouldn't have. If we had ran an independence referendum when we lost a third of our MPs and support for independence was kicking around the low 40s, we would have lost it. So I'm glad we didn't do that. But the one thing, and the most significant thing that's changed in the last year, is we've now got majority support. That changes everything, and that makes, in the past, the Tories have owned this idea that the Scottish people oppose an independence referendum and oppose independence. They don't own that anymore. We do. So the whole nature of mandates, of support, of backup is now with us. So when we get to May, what we've got to demonstrate is that very essence, that there is majority support for independence referendum and there's majority support for independence. And we can secure that with a SNP majority and recreate the conditions that we had in 2011. And what we did with an SNP majority last time, of course, led to the 2014 independence referendum. So what we're going to do is take away all the reasons and excuses about why the Tories feel that they could deny us this. And the more we do that, the less of a case they have to make and the more unsustainable it becomes. And I think that's why all of us in the Scottish National Party just now are saying that this is a critical election. There will be an unambiguous commitment to an independence referendum front and centre of the SNP manifesto, and that will happen if we are elected. And that is totally different from conditional mandates that we might have had 3 years ago, where we said we will have an independence referendum if this happens, or if that may happen to pass too. This will be unambiguous. There will be an independence referendum, and we expect fully the UK government to go along and accept the democratic will of the Scottish people.
So we are obviously, a lot of this has to do with Brexit. I mean, if there hadn't been that Brexit vote, it's very unlikely that we would be looking at another independence referendum so soon after 2014. Now, the worst of Brexit is going to hit us in 5 weeks.
Yep.
And potentially at this stage, that could be a no deal situation, which is not going to be good for any of us. So, how long can Scotland cope with that? And given that Ian Blackford, for example, has said repeatedly at PMQs and elsewhere, Scotland will not be taken out of the EU without its, against its will. How do you kind of square those things?
Well, I think when you're in an election campaign, you want to make an appeal and a pitch which sort of sums up where you are as a political party. So our view was Scotland will be taken out of the European Union against our democratic wish and desire. And we asked people to support that, which they did in vast numbers. That was the election that I just fought a year ago. So that was the decided democratic will of the Scottish people when it came to that election. And that was a statement from where the Scottish people are. And you're right, the Brexit process, and I noticed this at the beginning of last year, that where Brexit didn't particularly help the Scottish National Party during the 2017 general elections, for example, and maybe even the 2016 Holyrood election, people were now beginning to see the reality of Brexit and what it actually meant to them, and they were beginning to come to a conclusion that this was something that they really wanted and objected to be taken out of. And that sort of saw the build of support for the Scottish National Party in the way that we had planted and pitched that and tried to enlist people who had voted no in the independence referendum and yes in the Brexit campaign. And I think that we very cleverly managed to enlist people into that particular camp. And that is now the biggest converts that we now have for independence. And they're tentative. They're uncertain, these people. Like these are people who are new to the independence campaign. For them, it's been a big thing to move from being a no voter to a yes voter. They are appalled, scared and anxious about things like UDIs and plebiscites. Because one of the reasons they came to us because they saw the way that we built the case constitutionally in a way that was thoroughly democratic. So we've got to be careful how we respond to that new tentative recruit. And I've said in the past that if we're going to win our independence, we have to take everybody with us, all our support, from the most nervous, anxious, you convert to independence to the just get it doneers, those that just want to get it, no hanging about anymore. And if we take all that support with us, which now accounts to something up to 58% of the Scottish people, we win. But if we lose some of that support along the way, if we drive away these new converts, then we're in a very serious and difficult position. And that's why the UK government are saying no the way that they are. Because by saying no, they're trying to build on the frustration and impatience that a lot of people in our movement feel just now. They want to create the divisions because they know they can't beat us. The UK government have given up trying to beat us by a case against independence. They hope that we beat ourselves. They hope that we beat ourselves. They hope that they'll create these divisions that will turn on the movement. And I think sometimes, Kenny, when they look at social media and they see some of the things that have been said, they're thinking, gosh, that was an easy job and a job well done, because they're seeing that impatience growing into divisions and they're knowing that we're doing the job for the Conservative parties. Stop it. Do not oblige them. Let's work together, bring in everybody in our movement with us. And if we do that, we will win that next independence referendum convincingly.
Now, you mentioned this idea of taking everybody with you. But the SNP and the Yes movement has lost a chunk of voters, predominantly people who were pro-independence in 2014, but against the EU in 2016. How do you bring those people along with you? And do you worry that maybe the strong focus on stopping Brexit and being so insistently pro-EU has maybe been off-putting to some of those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt there was a lot of people disappointed who were supporters of Scottish independence with the approach that we took about rejoining the EU at the earliest possibility and the fact that we opposed Brexit so determinedly. And I know there was people disappointed with that. And we saw quite a lot of that in the 2017 general election. But political parties have got to decide. You've got to say this is what we need as a nation. And there could be no question about the fact that the best place for an independent Scotland is within the confines of the European Union, mainly because of the case that we make about similar sized European nations, your Ireland, your Denmark, your Finland, who are all in the European Union and all doing spectacularly well as a result of being in the EU. So, like, and if we were to say to people like who had just come to the party, who had decided that, you know, the reason that they joined the Scottish National Party supporting independence was because of our Brexit policy, that they were no longer pursuing an EU, that would be disastrous with them. And what I detected, this is just maybe my own constituency, because I did recognise and detect a number of people who had said that they were possibly minded not to support us anymore because of Brexit. Most of that has come back to us now, because I think even the most hardened nationalist Brexiteer has seen the hard line taken by Boris Johnson and the Conservative government and where Brexitism gets you, and decided that they want a part of that. So I've seen a lot of people moving back again to the Scottish National Party in support for independence. So there's still people who maintain that we shouldn't be in Europe, but I think that that is now starting to go away as a major reason, you know, for people stopping coming to independence.
Now, when we look at the shift in the polls, the shift in momentum that's happened over this year, the SNP, the Scottish Government, have been as mute as possible on independence. The First Minister particularly has really tried to avoid talking about it at all. And yet, at the same time, support has risen. I asked Alison Thulis this the other day, but is the SNP better off just stopping campaigning and letting Boris Johnson get on with it?
Well, I think there's a lot in that. You know, like Boris Johnson's been one of the best things that's ever happened to the Scottish National Party in the cause of independence. I mean, every time he opens his mouth on the issue and subject, it drives support for us. But no, though, we have to continue to make the case for independence. And I think increasingly we're being able to see that. But you have to say, like, the First Minister prime concern and almost exclusive concern is obviously getting this country through COVID, and the leadership she's offered in that has just been magnificent, and I think that's been recognised in her personal satisfaction ratings and the satisfaction of the government. But the case for independence has now been put centre stage. I made a pledge, I think it must have been about 6, maybe even 9 months ago, that nearly, and I've tried to do every single one of my parliamentary contributions, I would reference independence and try to put it in the face of the Conservative Party and Conservative. And I think I've been roughly successful in that. There might have been a couple of occasions where it's been quite hard to shoehorn independence in. But like, we've got to do this. And one of the things that you see in Westminster, just I know I'm a Westminster MP, is when you remind them that independence is now majority support, they just can't believe it. They're aghast. We had an opposition day in Westminster just before the summer recess, and it was all mainly about independence. And you could see the ranks of the Conservatives that they were saying, what the independence is ahead, and they all made a rush to Michael Gove's office. And this is where all the resources have now started to come forward in order to take us on, because they couldn't actually comprehend that we were winning. So it's our job to remind them every single day that Scotland is demanding something different from the rest of the United Kingdom. We are on different trajectories about what we want as nations, about what will satisfy our economic and cultural values. And we've got to make sure that case is made concisely and consistently. And I think if you're observing what's happening in Westminster just now, you're seeing Scottish National Party members do that.
Now, you've talked there about Michael Gove setting up this union unit. We've got the Scotland office building this big new headquarters in Edinburgh, which is expected to massively increase the staffing of the Scotland office. How much has the SNP and the Scottish Government done to gear up in the same way for a campaign?
Well, I don't think we've done all that much in the course of the last year because of all the COVID difficulties, but I think you're going to see that probably from this conference onwards. There will be capacity being built up. We're going to have our National Assembly, I think, in January, which will discuss some of the ways forward for independence, which will look at how we actually deliver and secure that. But the thing about the Conservatives just now, they're actually a little bit conflicted about how they do all this, because they know that the saying no to Scotland, things like the Internal Market Bill and all the other things they're putting forward, is all it's doing is driving support for independence. And a lot of them are actually reviewing this just to see, is it worthwhile continued to pursue this, given it is such a negative response and reaction in Scotland. And a lot of them are thinking that maybe we should approach Scotland a bit more conciliatory, believe it or not. And they're trying to back away from this idea of this aggressive unionism that has failed them so dramatically in the course of the past few years. And there's a review and report coming out in the next week or two. We might even see it as early as the end of next week from a guy called Andrew Dunlop, the Dunlop Review. And what it is a review of like how they promote and take forward the case of the union. And I've seen a little few details of this, and I've been to a couple of briefings about it. And this is suggesting a much more conciliatory conservatism and approach to Scotland, for trying to engage and involve them a bit more. I'd be more worried about that, the cuddly conservatism, than the aggressive unionism that's characterised them in the course of the past few years, because the aggressive union, the internal market bill, and all the other apparatus that they're doing, and all the attacks on democracy in the Parliament, has been singularly disastrous for the Conservative Party. And so they're now conflicted about how they do that. Do they continue to pursue this approach that's failed them, but sometimes somehow gives them some sort of satisfaction? Or do they look to try and address that, turn it around a little bit, and try to make some sort of progress in Scotland? So there are a whole range of different things that are going on just now. And it's going to be really interesting to see exactly how they will pursue the elections to the Scottish Parliament. They can't use no to second IndyRef anymore, the thing that they use at every election, because if they were to campaign on that, it would be for them to actually concede that there may be a second IndyRef, so they can't do that. So there's a whole load of stuff that they're currently concocting, looking at just now.
Now, when it comes to the movement, obviously people are, as we've talked about, people are impatient. People are concerned. They feel, as we said, the Brexit deadline is coming up in a matter of weeks, and it's not clear to some of them that there is going to be a referendum. And I was wondering, back in July, one SNP MP was quoted in The Scotsman telling activists to shut up or F off if they didn't have a viable alternative to Plan A. They should just shut up and go away. Is that kind of language helpful when it comes to building that unity, building that trust in the party?
Absolutely. I've never heard that remark before, but no, definitely not. I mean, like, we are a movement. Like, I think a lot of people describe the SNP as a political wing of the Yes movement, and that's a responsibility and obligation that we take very, very seriously. But I think there is, we have to, I mean, I think there was a sense, and I think there's a sense among some of the Yes movement just now, all of this is going to be easy, that there's some sort of secret solution or easy way through all of this. There isn't. This is hard work. We lost a referendum 6 years ago. It was never going to be easy to get to situation's position where it was just going to be pretty straightforward after that. Now, throughout that process, we've built this support up to this 58%, high 58% for independence. We're now at the next stage, which is securing that independence referendum. I always talked about an optimum time. We're at that optimum time now. We're there because we've got that support. And getting the support was probably the hardest part of our journey to independence, like turning that around from 20%, even 15 years ago, to 58% now. That is dramatic, epoch-changing of minds, perceptions, and views about a nation. The next part is securing the means to get to a referendum and our independence. If I thought there was an easy solution to this, I would grab it in a minute. If I thought that Angus MacNeil's and Chris McElhenny's plebiscite would get us there, I'd be the first to put my hands up and say, yes, that's the way to do it. It's not. All it would lead, if we did a plebiscite, for example, all it would lead us to a super Boris veto. Because we'd win an election with a commitment to start negotiations for independence. We'd turn up to Whitehall and Boris said, hi guys, thanks very much for coming. On you go, home you go. And that's it, vetoed. And what else do you do at that point? Now, unless you're thinking about a UDI or just declaring independence in the back of it, you're pretty much stymied when it comes to this. And this is why, when all these solutions emerge, they've got to be tested. They've got to be examined to see if they actually get us any further in their central quest of securing that independence for a nation. And I think there's a temptation from a number of the people in the Yes movement just to grab at anything that seems like it might get there. And we cannot go down dead ends. We've not got time for this. We've got to get there soon. We've got to make sure that we get our independence. So I appeal to people in the Yes movement that, look at some of the panaceas that come along. Look at them carefully and closely. Do they get us any further forward? And if they don't, stick with the plan, because this plan is winning. Like, we've got the 58%. We've got the Tories, like, at the point of, like, looking at how they take us on in the next independence referendum. And I know it's become a matter of faith for some in our movement that there'll never be an agreement. There'll never be an agreed referendum. And we could soon be knee deep in fighting the next referendum, and there'll be people swearing blind it's still not going to happen, and it's just really, really crazy stuff.
Now, there have been various other criticisms of the SNP in recent months, a lot of them coming from places like Wings Over Scotland, and I know you have had your disagreements with Stuart Campbell over recent weeks and months. I wonder, do you really believe that people like Stuart Campbell and some of the other bloggers that are out there that are skeptical about the SNP's strategy are really against independence, or are actively kind of getting in the way, given that all of this criticism of the SNP has happened at a time when the polls have changed?
Well, I don't get this criticism, and I refer to them as the SNP bad bloggers. It's not just criticism of the SNP; it's hatred based, verging on hostility to the Scottish National Party. And I just find it so difficult to understand and to comprehend about what do they think this actually achieves and secures. I mean, why would you want to get involved in divisions such as this? Why would you decry to such lengths the best chance that we've got to securing our national independence, becoming a nation of our own? Why you would spend more energy attacking the Scottish National Party than the Conservative Party? And I singularly fail to get it. Now, there's a number of, like, big egos out there, and obviously they've got followings and things, and social media allows you to get that. And it's I suppose it's pretty tempting to believe in the persuasion of your own voice, the things that you write down, and you've got a following that you have to satisfy. But I mean, I have to say, I'm not entirely sure whether all this is helpful just now. It's creating the divisions and the fragmentations that the Tories are counting on just now, and I make an appeal to people to, like, put these divisions, set them aside. We're as close as we're ever going to be to the mission that we've been fighting all these years to secure and achieve. Getting involved in, like, these type of criticisms and attacks on the Scottish National Party isn't helping anybody other than the Conservatives. So please think very, very carefully about what this does, how this appears to our political opponents. We are loving it. They're delighted at some of the attacks on the Scottish National Party. They don't need the Daily Mail or the Daily Express to do it anymore when they've got Stuart Campbell.
Now, one issue that Wings did raise was this question of the fighting fund, this almost £600,000. Now, I appreciate you're not responsible for the finances of the party, but it does seem like if that money is available to be spent, it should be fairly easy for the Treasurer to point to a line on a bank statement or on the accounts and say, there it is. And that would shut down some of this criticism that's come from Wings pretty much permanently. He would have been shown up for talking nonsense. Why hasn't the party done that?
Well, I think the party has. I think it was a very clear statement from the National Treasurer to say that this money is going to be available as and when required. And I don't know about the finances of the party, and I'm the wrong person to ask about all this. But if my National Treasurer is saying that this money is available and apparent and it could be available whenever we need it, that would seem to be enough for me, and I think it's enough for most of the party. But isn't it strange, like somebody like Stuart Campbell would spend more time discussing the finances of the Scottish National Party other than the dark money that props up and ensures the survival of the Scottish Conservatives, money that will probably be used to take us on in the independence referendum, which we don't even know where it comes from all sorts of shady sources. He's more interested in a fund that the National Treasurer says is available to us anytime, whenever we want it. And he's trying to create some sort of thing, again, about it's got this thing about our National Executive Committee, like trying to present this as the evil incarnate is such a bizarre thing to actually try to get into. And this is the thing that when we look at people like the SNP bloggers and the SNP bad bloggers, what, why are they doing this? I mean, what interest does this serve? Wouldn't it be better to look at the dark money of the Conservative Party, for example, instead of money that the National Treasury is going to be available whenever required for the source it was given to?
Mm. Now, I know we don't have you for very much longer, so I just want to ask a couple of questions before we wrap up. For people who are not in fact, no, first of all, you mentioned the conference. The NEC elections are coming up. And there has obviously been some debate online about different slates of candidates and different people upset about the way the NEC has been working, wanting to change how it works. How do you feel about some of those tensions?
Well, I don't think factions is particularly helpful and useful for the Scottish National Party, and I really wish they would all sort of disappear. We've seen what factionalism's done to the Labour Party. The experienced momentum of the course of the past few years rendered the Labour Party unelectable for about 3 or 4 general elections, and probably has kept them out of power for the next decade. So I'm not entirely sure that factions are a thing and a feature of a party that's particularly appealing and attractive to the ordinary voter. And I've seen the arrival of several lists, and people get to vote for the favoured candidate, and it's absolutely right that people decide. And if they're not happy with the current NEC, they replace it with other people that they feel are more capable and competent. But to give this list of people, because they sign up to a particular approach, and asking them to sort of take over the NEC as a slate, I just think it just leads to all sorts of difficulties and problems just down the line. And like the Scottish National Party has always been able to operate without these type of factions and tensions, and I just don't see why people feel the necessity to bring them forward. Just now, I know there's this idea that about the NEC has been like perpetuated in the course of the past few months. The thing is our National Executive Committee is designed by the party. The structure is democratically agreed by internal sessions of the party, and then we vote people onto it. We decide who's actually going to be there democratically. We vote people on, and then all of a sudden this has turned out to be some sort of like divisive evil incarnate body, as described by some of our friends, like in the harsher side of the social media. And now, not even having elections to replace it is good enough. They've got to have lists and factions of people that they want to have imposed upon the rest of the party. So I just think it's a thoroughly bad idea, and we've seen the example that it's given to the Labour Party. And I'm pretty certain that when we decide our elections tomorrow, people will make a decision based on who they believe is the best candidate, and not because a particular outside interest or outside body has told them who they think they should elect.
Mm. Now, obviously, as we've talked about, the SNP is the political wing of the Yes movement. So there are a lot of activists who are outside the SNP. The SNP obviously is looking first of all at the May election. That's the big one on the horizon right now. What do you think people outside the SNP should be doing just now to gear up for any potential future independence referendum?
Well, I think they should be getting ready, and I've seen quite a lot of activity in the Yes movement just now. There seems to be a number of initiatives that have emerged, which I think are particularly good, useful, and helpful. But I think we've still got to make the case yet. There's an assumption that we're taking for granted the fact that we're so overwhelmingly in the lead just now. We've had some fantastic support polls for independence, but I don't believe for a minute that the job's done. We still have to ensure that people buy into the whole reason about why we want to be an independent nation. We've got to do quite a lot of persuading and convincing of people who possibly haven't really bought into the full project yet, and a lot of work of that has to be done. But we've got something fantastic to work with that we've never had for a while, and that is a majority support for independence. And it's keeping that with us, and this is why I go back to an earlier point that we will win our independence if we keep all that support together, that we do nothing that makes them anxious, concerned, or might scare them off from supporting us, and we do the right thing, ensuring that we take it through the proper process and progressing it naturally about how we want to be an independent nation. And I think you're right that the next big test, and probably one of the most important democratic tests that we've faced as a movement, will be the election in May this year. We've got to get a stonking SNP majority. We've got to make sure that we recreate the conditions that led to the independence referendum back in 2014 with an SNP majority. And that's why I despair that some particular people were trying to split the SNP vote by, having all sorts of myriad of list parties that, very few people are going to vote for because nobody knows who they are, and they've got people that nobody's ever heard of, but we're invited to accept the notion that somehow they're going to secure up to 20% of the list vote, and it's not going to happen. But all that could do is that they come in about 2-3%, which is likely, is to take votes away from Scottish possible potential Scottish National Party list members of Parliament, and the Conservatives, they don't care about any other votes of any other party. They're only interested in SNP votes. They equate SNP votes with independence votes, so they wouldn't care less about votes for other parties. So, again, we have to get an SNP majority. We've got to make sure that majority is as big as possible, recreate the conditions in 2011, put the case for an independence referendum, and that's what everybody in the Yes movement needs to get behind just now, is that central project leading up to May next year.
And just finally then, Pete, I don't know if you're much of a gambling man, but assuming that the SNP does get a good result in May, and you had to put money on it, when would you predict that another independence referendum will happen?
Well, I think I listened to very carefully to the First Minister last night, and when she was asked this question, she said the early part of the next Parliament. And if I was, I know that seems like an evens odd bet, but that's what I would bet. I think there is a chance that we might be able to get next year. I mean, basically because I think that the Conservatives will be tempted to go as early as possible. When they're confronted with the reality of a SNP majority, with the majority still in favour of independence, they might just decide, let's just get this done as quickly as possible, giving them the best chance of actually trying to win it. So I think there's quite a lot in the fact and the prospect of it next year. But I think that if I was to put any money on any particular bet on this, I would say the early part of the next Parliament.
Well, Pete Wishart, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll let you get back
pleasure.
to celebrating those by-election wins now.
Thank you. Nice to speak to you.
So that was Pete Wishart speaking to us a wee bit earlier today. So that is all we have for you this evening. We'd like to thank you very much for joining us, and again, thank Pete for giving up his time this afternoon. We do always have to ask for your support. Broadcasting Scotland takes money to produce these shows, and we would ask you to support us during our crowdfunder that's running just now. So you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate to sign up for to contribute a one-off there, or you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up as a supporter. We ask for £5 a month. It's a lot cheaper than your TV license. So for those of you that have already cancelled your TV license and have that wee bit of spare money, maybe you could direct some of it to us. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand, but you can still make a big difference. You can follow us on Twitter, you can like our Facebook page, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then please share the shows around with your friends, your family, and anyone else you talk to. Let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, why you think Broadcasting Scotland is important. You're the biggest part of building our audience that way. And of course, next year we do have that election. We potentially have another referendum coming up. So we're also looking for people to volunteer to help out here. Now, it doesn't have to be here in the studio. There are people needed all over the country. So if you're interested in any way in helping to build that better broadcaster for Scotland, then do please get in touch with us. But that is all we have time for tonight. I will be back on Sunday with the Full Scottish at noon. But until then, thanks very much for joining us and have a great weekend.
Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.